Welcome back to Bad Points. We got Dan Wiggins back in the house, bringing the IQ up 50 points at least. I already warned Dan in the pre-show meeting, which lasted 10 seconds or so, that it's going to be pretty communist heavy. That's a huge issue right now. It's been a huge issue for decades, but that issue is like a snowball rolling downhill. It only gets bigger and bigger. So, Dan, first I wrote something down.
Okay.
I'm going to make a statement, and you're going to tell me if it's accurate or not, where the inaccuracies are, if there are any. The left represents chaos and anti-truth. The right represents order and truth. This is not to say one is good, one is bad, because someone could prefer chaos and lies and mystery. Is this accurate?
To a large extent, I believe so. It's not necessarily right or left, although it's usually pitched that way. It's more about truth and honesty and basically taking care of your fellow man versus jealousy, envy, and self-aggrandization. And the former tends to be much more aligned with conservative values, much more along like, traditional Western religious values. Buddhist values are very much the same thing, believe it or not. The latter is more of humanist, atheist, big government kind of values, where the individual wants to aggrandize themselves so they get a higher position in society to hopefully control more of society. So it's a different set. So I believe that's very much along the lines. And when you get to that, then it becomes, is it moral or not to lie or deceive people to get what you want? Pretty much anybody with a decent morality background, either in, one of the large major world religions, like Judaism, Christianity, Hinduism, Buddhism, if they're along those lines, they're probably going to say, no, you really shouldn't lie to kind of get what you want. Whereas if you have no moral basis, you'll lie and do whatever you have to get whatever you want in the first place. So that becomes much more of a humanist kind of point. And that's much more associated with the left.
So you can clearly get to authoritarianism either way.
100%.
Hitler was far right and he was an authoritarian.
Well,
Lenin was far left and he was an authoritarian.
Hitler wasn't really that far right. That's what people miss. He was far right in a few things.
Dan's an entrepreneur. He's a busy man. If you've ever known any entrepreneurs, you know that they work roughly 7 days a week, roughly 14 hours a day.
Okay, I'm back. Sorry. It was just the neighbor asking about, hey, he's got to step out for a minute. He's expecting a delivery. Can I cover it for him in an hour? Yes. So
well, I would have said that too if I had a call back from a prostitute. He is in Las Vegas.
It's 3. So.
Oh, okay. Well, that's reasonable. You got to take that.
That's right. Anyway, so, you do get to authoritarianism either way. One of the misgivings, though, is a lot of times people are like, oh, Hitler was far right. He had some things that were far right. He had a lot of things that were very far left. For instance, a lot of othering of people to the point of essentially treating them as non-human and killing them. That tends to be much more of a leftist atheist thing, because when you have a moral center to your life that's beyond you, is from a religion beyond you, is from a creator above you, you tend to at least put value on life. And you're like, hey, I may not like you. I hate people that live in Texas. I'm not going to stand them. They're all pieces of crap, but I don't want to kill them. Right? You get to that point. Now, I'm not saying anything against Texas at all. Nothing. I mean, I'm perfectly fine with Texas. In fact, I tell people the whole reason Oklahoma was invented and it stretches out that little tiny bit up there is so Kansas doesn't have to deal with Texas. Oklahoma kind of stands guard.
That's why I love members there. There you go.
Anyway, so when you untether from that, it becomes a lot easier to other people, like Hitler had done. You did that very successfully. The other thing was, he was very pro-national, and that is often associated with right, but a lot of leftists use it too. I mean, it goes both ways. China and South Korea, North Korea rather, they're very, very pro-country. It's all about them, nationalistic. So that's just much more of everybody uses it because it's something you focus people on that are bigger than me, which is a lot of where communism and socialism goes. It's about the people and the nation and not the individuals. So you want to focus them on that. But the biggest reason I say that Hitler was pretty much more of a socialist was he nationalized a lot of industries and he created entire companies to take over the entire, segments of industries altogether. And that's not a very right wing or conservative thing to do. So he may have been right of center on some things. He was left on center on a lot of things. Where I would put him is more on the left of center as a strong authoritarian. And that, I think, gets a lot of people upset because he really was a little left of center and 117 on the 0 to 100 scale of authoritarian. So that's where it was. This common misgiving, but you do get to authoritarianism with both sides. In fact, you get to authoritarianism with any government that has ever increasing or no restrictions on its power. Every single kingdom in the past, whenever groups of tribes got together and elected a big chief and they elected a king, authoritarian followed. Every single time government gets big, it becomes authoritarian, simply because of the fallibility of our nature as humans to always want what we want and put our own desires first without conscious effort to put others first. And so people will then start using government to climb the power ladder, because that's how you could take care of your own needs much more. If I'm the king, you remember History of the World Part 1, Mel Brooks? Did you
I
ever
didn't
that
see
movie?
that.
Dude, you
I
got to
need
watch
to.
Mel
I
Brooks.
love Mel Brooks.
He rubs he goes to give him good motorboat. He's like, it's good to be the king. When he's playing the French king, it's like, when you're the king, you get anything you want because you're the king. And if you don't like somebody, hell, look at Henry VIII. I don't like the fact that the Pope's not letting me divorce my third wife. So guess what? I'm going to start my own religion and have her killed anyway. Only a king can get away with that kind of a thing, right? And then he forced the entire country. He's like, by the way, if you don't join my new religion I just established today, I'll kill you all. Only a king can get away with that. So authoritarianism is a natural draw for human nature, because we're all fallen and sinful people. And so you're going to find authoritarianism wherever government consolidates its power. In my belief, that strong government is much more aligned with a leftist viewpoint, more importantly, a socialist and communist viewpoint, where it's less about the individual and it's more about the group. For instance, I've said this many times, and I've had a lot of people, including like Greta Sheafleet on X. She actually came over from China back, 25 years ago, and, was raised under communism. My wife, I met her when I was in Shanghai, and her whole family grew up through that. And I spent time with her grandmother before she passed away, who was in China, before she was under Mao, but also during World War II and the rape in Nanking and that whole thing. So she saw the whole thing happen. They have this interesting thing of, under socialism or communism, the people are all that matters. A person has no value. So it's all about, we have to take care of the people, everybody. And if you're not fully aligned with that, well, you're just a person. You have no value. We just get rid of you and we disappear.
You're against the revolution. You're against the utopia we're trying to build. You are a big problem. If it wasn't for you, we'd get there faster.
100%. And then the question becomes, well, who decides what the people want? And that's like, well, the leaders do. And so once again, the leaders are the guys who end up like, you look at Kim in North Korea. You look at how a lot of dictatorial leaders live. You looked at how, Khrushchev and Brezhnev and Stalin and all those guys lived. You look at how Hitler lived while he was alive. You look at Mussolini, how he lived. You look at all those. You also look at like strong right-wing guys like, what's his name in Spain? My name just went blank. The name just went blank. No. This is back before the Spanish Revolution in the 70s. And you look at Marcos in the Philippines. You get right and strongmen on the right and the left. Whenever they get big power, suddenly they're living in the huge palaces, and they're adding more palaces, and they're traveling where they want. They have great mountain view tops, and everything's taken care of them wherever they want. And they're, all the traffic is stopped when they go through. And it's not because of security issues. It's because I just want to go get a burger. Everything's going to shut down. I'm going to go do it. So they start living in their own little world and become their own gods. And that's true on both sides. But it's much easier to do that when you have a large government and a government worldview that says the government is the most important thing instead of the individual. When you come to countries that are very individualistic, you tend not to have much socialism and have very little communism. And, one of the things I point to is like, well, look at Switzerland. It's in the heart of Europe, tiny little nation. It's very, very capitalistic, and the individual holds a massive amount of power over the government, to the point where government barely functions without the people agreeing to it. They don't have drivers paid for their prime minister and their leaders of government. They don't give them huge salaries. So a lot of times those guys end up taking public transport between, buildings a couple miles apart from each other, because they have no other way to get around. That's not socialist at all. Now, they spend a lot of their money on a social safety net, but that's not socialism. Socialism is the people and the industries and the economy are more important than individuals. So we have to worry about that as a whole, and you don't matter.
So what distinguishes socialism from social services?
Well, for instance, I would say, let's look at Sweden. Okay. Everybody says, oh, it's socialist. And the Swedes will be the first one to say, screw you, we're not. We're the farthest thing from it. Because one of the richest men in the world, Ingvar, whatever his name is, the guy who created IKEA. He's worth 50 or 80 billion dollars. How do you get capitalists creating private companies, holding them private, becoming multi-billionaires, one of the top 50 people in the face of the world in terms of richness, in a socialist or communist country? You don't unless you have strong private industry protections. A lot of very wealthy people, I mean, Spotify came from there, right? Tidal came from there. So, I'm a big Tidal fan, by the way.
That
I'm going to
title
give
came from, you said Sweden?
Sweden is where we started.
Interesting.
So, and just a quick plug, new Matt Moran album, the Will Payne Harrison album. It's been out. My new Matt Moran album. Matt, get it on Tidal so I can stream it in the car. Anyway.
Yes, please. Matt and Will, get your music on Tidal so we can hear it.
Well,
better.
their older catalog is. Matt's just, but Matt's an Okie, and they're kind of a little slower, and it might take him a little while to figure out how to get the bits up through the phone line to get the latest thing on Tidal. So I give him that.
There's more than one button on computers.
That's right.
I won't talk too much trash.
But he's only got two fingers to type with, though.
I'm pretty sure Matt's smarter than me, so I'm going to let you do the trash talking. I'm going to sit back and just laugh at it.
He's a great guy. He's a great guy.
Yeah,
I actually got to meet him and listen to him in live down when he came to Ventura about 4 years ago. But anyway, so 5 years ago. But anyway, the problem is those countries are very capitalist. They have a very capitalist private enterprise where if you work hard and you come up with a good idea and you work on that idea, you capitalize on the idea, you'll be fabulously successful. And that's fully welcomed. A lot of, Ericsson phones, Nokia phones, things like that. Those are from those are from Scandinavia. That's where they were created. And they dominated the world until they got caught behind the smartphone revolution. So they're highly capitalistic. People can start their own companies. They can be successful in their companies. They don't have to share. But what those countries do is hey, we're going to also take our tax dollars and we're going to spend them strictly on making our own people better instead of, we'll give some money to our people and we'll give some money to neighbors. We'll give some money to folks that we've never heard of on the other side of the face of the earth. So, the U.S., we tend to just throw money everywhere. Which is kind of stupid. And a lot of that is also with our defense budget. It's we got 160 countries with bases in them, and we don't need that, especially given the range of aircraft now. We could probably get rid of 90% of them and still cover the entire world in a 2-hour issue. So it's that kind of a thing. It's how you spend your money that defines if you want a social net. So a social net is not something that comes from socialism or communism. I remember talking with my my wife's grandmother before she passed about what life was like under Mao's Great Leap Forward. That's communism, right? 100% communism.
Yep.
Now,
100%.
Millions of people starved to death. And everyone's like, oh, that's not true. I'm like, no, there's records of that. Number one, that are written. Number two, I talked to her and 8 or 9 of her friends who all said, yeah, I remember we had 5 of our 12 family members died because we couldn't cook, because we didn't have food, and because all of our cooking utensils had to be turned into the government to be melted down to create new stuff, and nothing was ever provided back. So we had to figure out how to char bamboo pieces to make cooking utensils and cooking pots and things like that to cook your food. And of course, every 3 or 4 days, you had to make new ones because they just char through. There was no social safety net, right? None at all. That's communism. Because again, the social safety net exists whether government decides if it's important for the people. And if it's not important for the people, because there's more important things to do, social safety net goes away. So people who equate a social safety net with socialism are either very uneducated and not very intelligent, or they're willful liars who know that this is there and they're just saying, oh, I want to be kind and things like that. I want you to support my version of socialism because I believe under socialism I can help make things better, and I get to be a poet, or I'll get to run a cute little gallery and talk about art all day long because I can choose my own job. When the reality is, no, you're going to be out digging ditches for 12 hours a day because that's what we need. And by the way, next month is your turn to go through, clean out the shitters in the sewer. So have fun. Well, I don't want to do that. Boom, you're done. Next. Who else wants to complain now?
And if you're unable to work or do anything useful, you are a bog on the system, and it would be better for the collective if we get rid of that individual.
100%. 100%. And unless that person can bring value, we don't care about them. And we're not even going to take care of them. We're seeing some of that in China right now, too, where if you're a dissident, if you don't say things the correct way, if you don't do all the right stuff, if you accidentally send the wrong messages on WeChat or WhatsApp, outside of China, your social credit scores hurt. And suddenly it's like, oh, I can't go grocery shopping. I can't even get back into my apartment complex. By the way, one of the defining factors of socialism and communism is there's no private property ownership. None. So right off the bat, when somebody says, oh, that country's socialist, go look. Oh, hey, you know what? 85% of the lands are owned by private private people or local governments. That's not a socialist communist government. China, you don't own land. You could get a 75-year lease on something, but it's revocable by whim of government whenever they want.
Yeah, you're just renting it.
Effectively, yeah. It's like, you lease the property. You could pay for it, and then you don't have to pay more for all the development on it, but you're leasing it, and in 75 years, if the government doesn't want to renew it, it doesn't renew it. You don't get it back.
There's obviously a line where it crosses from social services to socialism. What is that line? It feels like America is approaching that. We have a lot of people on welfare, and we're getting increasing need for welfare because of this or that mismanagement of funds, corrupt government officials, or whatever the case may be. Where is that line? When is it crossed? How is it crossed? Does it require a formal declaration? How does that work?
I honestly think there is no line of putting too much social services forces you to become socialist. I don't think that line even exists because, again, it's delivery of purposes. For instance, if you're at a hospital that provides care for people, and you have the internal ability to offer discounted services for those that don't have insurance, you want to survive, you want to keep going, great, you're charging money for it. But if the leadership of the hospital decides, we're going to keep cutting costs, it doesn't mean that suddenly, oh, hey, Seth, I know you're a physical therapist, right? So you're one of those torture agents. I had to put up with one for a couple months while I had my wrist rebuilt from a shattered piece. I got a big old chunk of titanium and a bunch of screws in here. Bastard. But, they don't come to you and say, we're not paying you this month because we're going to give it to 12 other people. That would be socialism, where they just dictatorially decide you're less important than those 12 people, so we're just taking from you what you want. They'll come to you and say, hey, in the next 12 months, we might have to cut your salary, cut back on your hours. You have that decision to make. So you only cross the line from I've got too much emphasis on social, or I'm spending too much, to I'm a socialist country, when essentially the leadership decides we no longer care about individuals, or we've changed the legal system so that individuals no longer matter. For instance, in China, when you go to court, when you're arrested by a policeman, you're presumed guilty, and the courts are done by a trial of 3 judges. There's no jury. And your whole point is to argue, yeah, I did something wrong, but this is why I did it. This is why I shouldn't be punished. Because why would the police arrest you unless you were wrong? That's the mindset. So immediately it puts you in that. But that, again, that's that whole thing of the person is subservient to the government. It's not the other way around, like what we did. And like a lot of countries that have had a revolution from throwing off feudalism and kings and things like that, and becoming more of a democracy or republic where the people run things. So there's really no line there until you get so bad. Now, note, you can also spend way too much money, not on social services, but on foreign affairs or defense or internal construction works, things like that. I would argue that a lot of the money that FDR spent in the 30s on all the public works around the U.S., he spent way too much. And it probably that's probably one of the big reasons why the Depression drug out so long, was because the government was, by spending so much, it was tamping down the private industry, the economy to grow. And as a result, it just drug it on until, hey, we got in a war. And then everybody said, well, we're all going to go do that and make money. But so you could spend your way into oblivion either way. And the closer you get to oblivion, the more people will turn and shout for government of just take everything over out of my control. And then boom, socialism.
The hospital administrator saying, hey, we're not going to pay you this week because we want to pay these 12 other people who don't have as much money, or whatever the case may be. They would inevitably follow that up with, well, that's just fair. They don't have as much as you. So a very core foundational principle of fairness, there is a massive disagreement on what that means. How does that originate? How do they come to that conclusion? Does it all go back to the everyone must be equal at all costs, no matter what?
No, it doesn't, because inherently that's not everyone being equal. If I take from you and give to somebody else because they don't have a job and can't afford it, their results may be equal, but it's not equal in terms of what each is putting in. You're putting in the hours, you're putting in the sweat, you're putting in the time, you're giving up your life energy, and it's just being handed over to somebody else in the form of dollars. It's not equal. What it is a sense of self is more important than someone else. I'm worth more than anybody else. There's not a sense of equality, right? I know I'm an old fat white guy. I'm slow. I don't play sports very well. I don't do a lot of things really well, but there's some stuff I do really well. I will gladly acknowledge those that are stronger and better and everything else, and have got the six-pack like you instead of the pony keg like me, things like that. It's equality comes in many different ways, and we're not all going to be equal in every single way. When a person sees that and wants to say, well, I think I know better and I'm going to do this, they're putting themselves above you and to a large extent to the person they want to help, because essentially they're saying to you, you're less important than me because I can take from you and give to this other person, and they're saying to the other person, you're less important than me because I'm the only one that can take care of you. So they're elevating themselves above their fellow man and trying to play God, so to speak, for their own benefit, for their own sense of being and sense of being proper. And, I'm a more important person, which is the fundamental problem. It's essentially a selfishness thing, a jealousy thing, an envy thing. I'm envious of what you have, Seth, and what you have gained with your family. And that person needs help. So if I could take from you and give to them, I can make myself feel better. And at the same time, I can enrich myself. Whether it's enriching myself with actual dollars that kind of go in my pocket for facilitating that transfer, or it's, oh, you know what? I'm enriching myself just because I feel better, kind of a thing, right? So either way, I'm enriching myself. So that's a lot of it. It comes from that, and a sense of desire to improve your own standing by acting like you're improving those of the others, usually to cover up for self-awareness about your own misgivings, your own shortcomings. I've screwed up a huge amount in life. There's a reason why I got so much gray hair. But
Well, yeah.
that's where you learn
Let
from.
let me devil's advocate a little bit, and it's hard to do because I do not agree with them. Uh, you you're smart, so you're able to do things that a lot of people can't do with technology, entrepreneurship. You either gotta be smart to be an entrepreneur, or you gotta work your ass off and be adequately smart at least, right? So it's not fair that you got to start a company and make all that money when these people over here, they weren't born with the IQ that you were born with. That's not fair.
Yeah.
That's injustice. It's only right if we give them things that they were not born with the ability to make.
Yeah, and that's where you come down to the difference between equality and equity. I'm a big believer in equality. All men are equal in that we should all have the same ability. We should all have the same ability to rise to our own natural talents. I should not put artificial restrictions in your pursuit of whatever makes you happy. We have the rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Those are like the fundamental three, and everything comes from there. I should not be able to pull your life. I should not be able to restrict you from what you want to do, as long as it doesn't infringe on my own liberty or somebody else's liberty. And I should not be able to eliminate you from pursuing what makes you happy. That's no guarantee you're going to succeed. That's equality. We treat people fairly. Equity is the fail point. That's where we look at what happens, and well, two people didn't end up with the same result, and that's not fair. So we're going to take from the one who got more and give it to the one who had less, and we're going to balance it out that way, no matter what that is. That is, in essence, robbing Peter to pay Paul. The old biblical thing, right? You're artificially limiting a person's happiness that they have worked to achieve, and to a large extent their own liberty, because you're basically saying, I don't care that you spent your time to get that. I'm now taking that time from you. And people are like, what do you mean? Because at the end of the day, money represents time. People pay you for your time, whether you're digging a ditch, whether you're designing, big, huge sound systems, whether you're an astronaut flying in space, whether you're a surgeon or a physical therapist. They're paying for your time. And I'm taking your time, your money, and giving it to somebody else. And that's not fair. That's restricting your liberty. Because I'm sure you would much rather go, you know what? Instead of giving all my money over to that guy, yeah, I might give him $20, but I'm going to give him $5,000 worth of my time. I'd rather just sit around and do nothing. If I'm not going to get paid for it, I'm not going to get compensation for that time. I'll go fishing. I'll play with Play-Doh, right? I'll go do something else, things like that, than anything else. So equity is not about equality. In fact, they're diametrically opposed. And it's sold as, oh, we want everybody to succeed. Yeah, I want everybody to succeed to their abilities. I never had a shot at, so in high school, I was a huge monster, right? 6 foot, 300 pounds, big broad guy, short legs. I was little, and I wrestled, played a little football, but I was like, if I was 3 or 4 inches taller, I could have made a D2 or D1 school as a football lineman. I was too short. That's what we got. And thank God I never went into it, because my knees are still perfect. At the age 57, I have no joint problems at all as a 300-pound guy my whole life. You're like, that's impressive. It's because I don't run.
That is quite impressive. Yeah.
Because I don't run. I don't I swim. I'll do some biking. I'll walk. I don't do heavy impacts because I know my whole life I was going to be that problem. And so I don't have that issue. I didn't play those sports in college at the collegiate level that would do that to me. So was that fair? I wanted to play football. I'd love to play football. I also wanted to be a stage performer. I think I would have been a fabulous frontman for a rock band. But, my range kind of tops out at like an F above middle C. I can't sing higher than that. And suddenly 99% of rock catalog goes away. Is that fair that I couldn't? Well, yeah, it is fair. It's not equitable. I should have been able to get put in front of, been a frontman for a year and a half on Pearl Jam. but that would be equity, forcing it to happen. But equality is I rose as high as I could with the talents I have, and have done that. Others have done the other way. Ed and Stone and Jeff, those guys went and they took Pearl Jam, made it huge with their talents and their skills. So equality is making sure that you're not limited from achieving the best that you can achieve with what you have. And
So,
equity is the other way around.
it really goes back to, it seems like leftists, socialists, I guess you just call them leftists, people that
Yep.
think like that, that's their worldview.
Yep.
It seems like they just cannot accept the reality that some people are born one way and other people are born another way. Like, I wasn't born with LeBron James' body. We shouldn't cut his salary up and give it to short people.
Correct.
But
Exactly.
it seems like they can't accept that. They can't accept that very simple, irrefutable, unchangeable fact of life.
100%, 100%. And that becomes the fundamental problem. And when you have that as a worldview of, well, it's not fair that not everybody has a nice house. It's not fair that, so not many people know, but there was a time I went bankrupt early in my career. I mean, and there was a time I lived out of the back of my pickup for a couple months, right? Now I got a big, beautiful wife, beautiful home, live in a nice community, a top end community. Hell, last year he's no longer with the Las Vegas Raiders, so he's moved on. He doesn't have that anymore. But he across the street, 2 houses down, Gardner Minshew, the starting quarterback last year for the Raiders, bought that house and lived there. I lived in the neighborhoods with NFL and MLB people and things like that. I've been able to get successful that way.
So you're white and rich.
Yeah, I
You're
know.
the epitome of evil.
I know. I'm a heterosexual guy as
You
well.
should have been poor, you terrible person.
I know, I'm just terrible. But it's one of those things that when you stop and think about it, because the US, because of I grew up, I started college in the mid 80s, right? I was of that time, that kind of magical generation of Reagan, and to a large extent Clinton, because Clinton wanted to go hardcore left, but Clinton was the ultimate self-survivor. And as soon as 2 years in, the Newt Gingrich revolution happened, he's like, I'm going straight with those guys with Newt because that's the only way I'm going to
Grifter.
survive. And so we
Yeah.
had that Reagan, we had, Bush W was actually decent. And then we had Clinton. So we had 20 years of a really good time. And I came of age of that. It was really good. But so I could achieve. What I found is, having lived in the US and around the world, countries that protect individuality and equality of people. In other words, we're not going to restrict you from doing certain things. We're not going to tax you more because of this. We're not going to force you to do certain things we don't want to. They have the highest level of social mobility. And I believe even Thomas Sowell has pointed this out, one of the most brilliant men ever. And I really hope President Trump, when you're listening to this, because Trump listens to your podcast, right? He does, yeah. Okay. When he listens, you need to give a Presidential Medal of Freedom to Thomas Sowell. He's probably one of our greatest economists of all time. He needs it. But he has pointed out that the U.S. has much more social and wealth mobility than pretty much any country on the face of the earth. You get people who go from absolute abject poverty to insane riches, and people who go the exact opposite way. And you'll see families over the course of 2 or 3 generations go from nothing to, we're a family worth billions of dollars, and you'll see families go the exact opposite way. You don't see that in other countries where they don't value equality so much and they value equity. Why? Because when the government gets to say, oh, Seth, you're getting too rich, we're going to give money to other folks, I've capped how far you can move and what your family can move. And now I brought those other people up who aren't really deserving of it and not able to maintain that level. Anyway, we're going to do that. I now at government can pick and choose the winners and losers. And that gets back to the old nobility thing. And I think that's why people want to. Ultimately, they want to be kings and queens. They want to play in their own little fiefdom of, I get to choose who I'm going to name a knight. And then if they're really good to me, I'll make them a baron and maybe, beyond that. And then they will be able to be royalty rich. Absent that, you're all freaking serfs. We don't give a crap. So equity, the pursuit of equity, locks in and freezes the entire social structure climbing up and down. Equality doesn't. And I think that's why the globalists, you put it very well, globalists, leftists, they love equity because it secures their position on the ladder. You don't have to worry about somebody passing you on the ladder at all, because you basically just freeze everybody on the ladder and it's stuck where it is. And if you play your cards right, and if you grease the right palms, and if you worship the right person above you, they might pull you 1 or 2 rungs up. But it's not on your own doing, it's somebody else. And so ultimately, equity leads to a stagnation of society. And that's probably the worst thing that could happen to any society.
Of course, it takes away incentive structures, and you won't get innovation. Nothing will improve. Why would you keep your store clean when you know your store is going to be open no matter how bad of a job you do? So, yeah, it's all really self-evident when you look into it. And I think the only people that can't understand that are of course, profoundly low IQ people, but also people that have been convinced that any other ideology is cruel. And that's the thing, man. They weaponize American leftists,
Mhm.
liberals. They weaponize liberals. They use their, because they're not at their core not a bad person. I'm not talking about the left extremists
Yeah,
who
yeah,
laugh
yeah,
at
yeah,
Charlie Kirk's death,
yeah,
but just the typical leftists kind of want socialism, or definitely want, so like they're doing it because they think it's the good thing to do. So they kind of leave them. And of course, we're tribal too.
mhm,
So if all my friends are leftists and I start speaking the truth about the dangers of equity, they're going to call me a bad person, and that's the last thing I want to do. I don't want to be. I try so hard to be a good person. So, and everyone around me in my echo chamber is telling me I'm a bad person for these ideas. So they must be bad. Those ideas must be evil. So I'm going to fight endlessly to stop them,
yep,
to oppose them. So it's a vicious
yeah.
cycle. Next question. Without getting into Russian history, we're going
Uh-huh.
to fast forward past that. Where are the Bolsheviks right now?
The Bolsheviks, they're basically working, I believe, globally and pulling a lot of the strings to kind of foment this whole takeover, things like that. And it's less about, oh, we want to have one world government. It's more about realizing that whether you like it or not, whether you're on conservative side or liberal side, in 100 to 150 years, there probably will be a singular massive government. It's inevitable. Governments oftentimes were able to maintain themselves apart because of geography and technology. I mean, if you think about it, the United States of America is older than Germany. It's older than France. It's older than Italy. It's older than the modern nation of Poland. Ukraine didn't exist until 1991 as its own nation. Belgium didn't exist. I mean, and people are like, well, what the hell do you mean? It's like, in 1862, Germany finally reunited and created like 85 little kingdoms and became a country. France, hell, I mean, they came over and helped us throw off the English, which was great. And then 10 years later, they killed their king and started all over from scratch. Italy is in the same time in the 1800s. So most of the world, its current borders and even its current government are younger than the US. Yes, they may have a history that goes back thousands and thousands of years, but they're
But they've
newer than that. I mean,
reformed.
hell, China is, 1949. Right? It's not even 100 years old
So you don't speak of the landmass. You speak as the
of the
republic.
political births, and it was easy in those days. You had 100 little fiefdoms and kingdoms in Germany because you were limited by how far you could ride on a horse in a day. And if you're in hilly terrain, well, it's one thing to be in West Texas, in East Texas, another to be in mountain country, right? Suddenly it's like, well, I can go 5 miles in a day versus I can go 50 miles in a day, and that's what kind of happened. And so how far you can move to find your territory and where it went. And you didn't really have to worry about, well, I don't have to worry about my neighbors. I don't have to worry about the guy beyond because there's no way he could get to me. He's so far away. It's a freaking 4-week journey to go 300 miles. I'm not doing that.
It's a logistical nightmare.
Logistical nightmare. But as we've got more and more mobility, as we got more and more interconnectivity of communications, suddenly barriers don't matter. I have engineering teams that I work with in Asia, that I work with in Eastern Europe, that I work in South America, that I work all over the U.S., right? Hell, I telecommute every day, a 4.5-hour drive. I telecommute instead. I go into the office, for, 3 or 4 days a month, that kind of a thing in Southern California. Usually I'm here in Las Vegas. So we've gotten very small. And when that happens, you start to naturally break down some borders. You start to see unifications like you see the EU, like you see USMCA for a large extent, right? You could go into Canada and Mexico with just a driver's license. You don't need a passport. The money works, things like that. And then you see it extended to places like Costa Rica, where you could just come in real easy. You don't need a visa, and they accept the U.S. dollar. It's one of their two currencies. They got the colones and the U.S. dollar. And you just go there and spend U.S. dollars. It doesn't matter. So it starts to break down a lot of the borders, and people just start to conglomerate. And I think as transportation capabilities and as communication abilities and telepresence capabilities keep growing, we're going to see that breaking down even further. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. It's a good thing if the ideals of equality and individual liberty and the value of the individual greater than the government, if that stays that way, it's a great thing. If it doesn't, it's a terrible thing. So I see it less as they're worrying about I need to turn individual countries, more about I have to turn societal belief, because ultimately countries will start kind of bleeding together. And instead of being individual countries, will be more like states. It'll be more of that kind of an intra communication like it is in Europe right now. They're individual countries, but so much is common between us and a lot of other places we work heavily with. It's pretty easy to get back and forth. So I think that's where it's going to come down. So I think the Bolsheviks are focusing on don't worry about taking over government. Take over government where you need it so you can enforce when we get enough social motion behind us, we can enforce equity and that kind of a belief in structure, things like that. But otherwise, just worry about the social structure. And that's why they took over the schools. That's why they took over a lot of the media. That's why they took over a lot of entertainment, because those are the things that drive culture. And when culture changes, then the politics follow. As who was it? Breitbart, Andrew Breitbart. I was saying, politics is downstream from culture.
Upstream from culture, yeah.
So when that happens, you're going to have a change in politics. So if they can influence culture appropriately in a generation or two, it's going to happen. 2 generations ago, when I was in my teens and early 20s, there was very little racism. There was very little hatred like this. You had people on the left and right, but it came, you had, even at the political level, you had, Ronald Reagan and his whole group. And they had like Tip O'Neill and Scoop Jackson, who were the leading, the men who led the entire Democratic policy. And they had different ideas about what they were going to spend, but they were both sides are 100% united of America's going to be number one, and we're going to make sure the American person can achieve the best that they can achieve. But Reagan, you want to spend all money and go into big defense and become a war hawk against the USSR and worry about them and things like that. We think we need to spend more money internally socially. So it's more about how do we spend our money rather than why are we spending it. Well, it's now changed to why we're spending it instead of where we're spending it. And we're dictating where we're spending it based upon why, of how can I change people's minds from worrying about themselves and celebrating the individual to you're just a cog in the wheel. The people are everything, a person is nothing. That kind of attitude. And that's what breaks it down. It was interesting when I lived in Chile, I talked to a lot of the older folks there who had been there when Pinochet took over, right? And they remember when Allende was elected, and a lot of them didn't vote for him. Some did. They're like, yeah, I voted for Allende. He was terrible. And Allende spent a year and a half kind of basically turning the country into a socialist communist hellhole, where it no longer mattered about the individual. Started roughshod writing over individual rights. And we're going to do this because it's better for the people. And like, but you're taking away my land. What doesn't matter? Because it's better for the people. You don't matter. And it got to the point where he disbanded Parliament. Because I don't like you're not supporting me, he disbanded him. And so Parliament turned to the Supreme Court and said, what do you think? And the Supreme Court's like, he can't do that. So Allende suspended the Supreme Court. And so the Supreme Court and Parliament went to Pinochet.
Checkmate.
Yeah, exactly. And so they went to Pinochet and said, can you get rid of this guy? He's like, okay, I got rid of him. We're going to give helicopter rides. But then he did the smartest thing ever. He could have been a king, like what George Washington had, at the end of the revolution. Could have been a king.
They wanted him to be king.
He didn't want to be. Pinochet was like, okay, I did something here. He went and he talked to a bunch of experts around the world, said, how would you set up a country? How would you set up an economy? How would you set up a government? And he got outside and he built it. And so a lot of people that I talked to at that time, they're like, Pinochet did a lot of stuff that were bad, and he's answering to God for that. But he saved Chile by eliminating the path we were going down. And that's what allowed Chile in the 70s and 80s and 90s and 2000s just explode. It went from like the wealth, the poorest, is down there with Bolivia and Ecuador just scraping the bottom of the barrel and just a hellhole to, it's about one of the wealthiest countries in South America. In fact, it became the wealthiest country in South America per capita. And great infrastructure and a great culture, and people could succeed if they worked hard and they had a good idea and got a good opportunity. So it's that kind of a thing. You need punctuated individuals who will guard that for you. If you can get those people out with culture, don't let them arise, number one. Number two, bend them so that even if they had that tendency, you could kind of curve them a little bit towards your side of, well, we got to worry more about the folks. Then I can change culture, which means I can change politics. And then I get to hopefully one day play little fiefdom God.
Yeah, and if you control which pop stars get famous and play the Super Bowl, and you control which athletes have the highest Q rating, and you control the news networks, then you can absolutely push culture in whatever direction you want, because most people are going to, it's an appeal to authority. Well, all the people that I worship on television and at concerts and stuff, those people say this, so yeah, I'm going to lean that direction. Yeah. So that has clearly been happening in our country. Mm-hmm. Everything for decades, everything mainstream skews left.
Yep.
And my next question would be, do you think that Benjamin Netanyahu is a Bolshevik posing as a Jew?
I don't think so. So I have friends who live in Israel. I've worked with Israelis off and on. I've been to Israel a few times. I'm a Christian. I see the shared heritage. I also believe, that the way, the truth, and life. No one gets to the Father but through me. And Jesus said that, and I'm like, oh, I can't believe that. It kind of means like,
I'll just believe him.
that's right. At the same time, though, I lived with a bunch of with Buddhists. I lived deep in Thailand for almost a year, out in the hinterlands with nothing, just me and a couple families, and the Buddhist, Thai Buddhist monks around there, and people would translate for me. I had great conversations. They're phenomenal people. I love them to death. I think they're misguided, but I see a lot of value in what they're doing. I think Netanyahu is not a Bolshevik. He's a nationalist. And sometimes that can be confusing to see the difference. He's doing whatever he can to protect his nation, because whether you like it or not, Israel's a nation of what, like 7-8 million people? And they've got 350 million, 400 million Muslims around them. Until 10 years ago, most of them wanted to kill him. I mean, you've got Turkey, you had Syria, you had Iraq, you've got Iran. Iran's kind of, they're just incompetent. But you've got Egypt, who actually is a really good, force. They're a military power. And one of the best things that came out of, Carter, things like that, was getting Sadat and Begin to make the Egyptian-Israeli peace accords kind of thing. And it's held. But if you're not hyper vigilant for yourself, you could pull, the Muslim world around Israel could pull the ultimate, Mongol horde of like, we're just going to just mass 150 million people on your border and we'll just wipe you out. And it doesn't matter if we lose 80% of them. You can't go up against 20 to 30 men to one. You lose every time, especially when your nation is as wide as a howitzer could shoot. I could line up a bunch of 155s on my side and I could cover, if I just put them every 400 or 500 yards along your entire border, I can cover your entire country with shells wherever I want. So
it's like shooting into a hallway of people.
100%. And the other end is locked because it's the Mediterranean Ocean. So it's like, you can't stop them. And like, oh, there's 100 people in the hallway. Yeah. And there's only 20 of us at the front, but there's another 10,000 behind me. And I may lose the first 20 or 30 rows, but we're going to get through. It's like, like the zombie movies, right? You could be a great fighter, but at the end of the day, when you're facing a million zombies, you're going to lose. It's just the masses win. As has been said many times, quantity has its own quality, right? When it comes to war.
True.
And so I view him as a nationalist and an absolute adherent to the existence of Israel. And he will do whatever it takes to make sure Israel exists. And sometimes that means using allies. Sometimes that means lying. Sometimes that means using underhanded tricks. Sometimes that means partnering up with people that he might not want to. But whatever he could do to make sure that Israel exists another day is what he does. Is that wrong? Well, it depends upon if you're the one being lied to and tricked. I would say, yeah, it kind of can be. On the other hand, from his viewpoint, if Seth, your neighbors always wanted to take your land from you and you had to do whatever it says, and there's this guy who's 2 blocks over who happens to be 6'7" and 325 pounds and is on the police force and things like that, and has a couple pit bulls that come on over and they're very well trained, but they love to play with Play-Doh and things like that, you're going to do whatever it takes to get him over to your house as much as possible. And when your neighbors start acting up, he's going to be the first one you call. And just the fact your neighbor knows, oh, shit, he called him, they're going to back off. So I see him as using every means he can to cajole and like, hey, have some beers, come on over, we'll do this kind of things. Oh, it's terrible. You go out at night, you slash tire. Oh, it's terrible. Your tires were slashed. I think it was my neighbor that did it. Things like that. Because you stole the knife from your neighbor and did it. He's like, oh, it might have been him. You're going to do whatever you can to protect yourself. And so I think that's really where he is. And a lot of people, I don't think, understand that when you're a nation like that, whose literal survival could, if it's enemies that wrap all the way around it, absent Egypt, because, they have a truce, if everybody else wrapped around them and just decide we're going to eliminate Israel, there's no way Israel could survive. The only way you could survive is by making sure that you have the 325-pound linebacker on your side, number one. And number two, you sow discontent amongst your enemies, right?
Regime changes.
And I think Netanyahu is so involved in the American government because I think when you look at Trump and his team, they love the Abraham Accords. And I think it was one of the greatest things ever. He should have got a Nobel Peace Prize for that. When you actually got, people are like, oh, they were already talking together. Yeah, they were talking together back channels and nobody would confirm or deny. When you had a country that wanted to survive with others and everybody else was talking to him wouldn't even acknowledge their ability to exist or even their existence. They're just, they're occupiers. They're not even a real country. Suddenly, yeah, they may have been talking behind channel, but you got them to come out publicly and say, yeah, we're going to actually work together. I acknowledge their right to exist. I acknowledge they're a real entity. I may not want them to stick around, but they're real. We're going to deal with them as a real people to people now. That was a huge step. That was a sea change in things. And I think that's what drove Iran really off the edge and made them just go, oh my God, we're losing the opportunity for everything. I think that is what's going to happen. I think some of the things that Israel has done when it attacked Qatar, it went in and attacked Qatar, but only in a very specific area. Qatar wasn't too upset about it. They did these, we condemned the attack because it wasn't really good and you shouldn't have done it. And it was like almost said like that because they're like, yeah, but they attacked the area where Hamas really had a foothold. We couldn't rat them out on our own. It's like when we went into Yemen and attacked when Israel went into Yemen and when we went and shot into Yemen and took out the Houthis. It's like, Yemen, the official Yemenese government was like, you shouldn't have done that. That was kind of bad. We really don't like you shooting into us, but the Houthis are gone. But you shouldn't do that. So it was like they're upset because they're supposed to be upset, but they liked what happened. So I think that Israel is playing that role. I think Netanyahu's playing that role. I mean, it's not always on the up and up. There's a lot of, politics is a dirty business and, international relationships is much more dirty, but he's doing it just for the survival of Israel. And I can, I'm not going to doubt the man for it. I may not like the motives he's done, but I can understand why he's doing it. And to me, it's more
Do you
moral
think he is
doing it just because he wants to kill Muslims. It's much more
yeah.
moral.
He's not just a maniac. He's calculated.
That's right. Yeah, he's doing it for a reason.
Do you think he is a fanatical Zionist?
I believe that with all my heart because the whole reason.
Isn't that as dangerous, if it succeeds, as radical Islam?
So are you a radical American? Are you willing to say, I want America to just roll over and it can just go ahead and become Mexico, or I don't care if we're subsumed by China, that's fine with me.
Like, would I die for my country?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you're a radical American in the same way that he's a Zionist. In other words, he puts his own country first. One of the things
but factor in the final evolution of radical American is probably like isolationism. Isolationism
to a large extent.
The final, and I'm not saying that's what it is, but it's kind of like that. Like, hey, we're America. We have our ideals. I'm not talking about American empire. I'm talking about America. But if the end goal of radical Zionism isn't that everyone is lesser than the Jews?
No, absolutely not.
It's not.
No, Zionism is.
Is there a sect of Judaism like that? I think there is. Yeah, like the extreme, just like there's kind, good Muslims who don't want Sharia law and
100%. Yeah,
do you think he's the dangerous Zionist?
Like there's pro-Americans, and then there's those that are hardcore white supremacists. And if your family wasn't here if your family
America's
didn't
a
come
white
over
country, we got to kill the blacks.
That's right. If your family can't trace its history back to Mayflower, to the Pilgrims, you're not wanted here. Well, my family all came in the 90s, so I don't actually qualify as an American to those kind of folks. I should be a foreigner. I'm kicked out. You always find those sects everywhere, and they're a minority. I see it as much more of I want to make sure my country succeeds. I'm incredibly defensive of my country and my people and who we are. When I went to Israel the first time in the mid-1990s, there were mosques, there were churches, there were synagogues. There were a lot of Muslims, there were a lot of Christians, there were a ton of atheists, there were a whole bunch of Jews living and working together peacefully every single day. That just happened, And so it was a melting pot, so to speak. There wasn't the whole thing. You could walk around with a Bible in Israel without a problem, and you won't get killed. Try that in Saudi Arabia, you get arrested. All right. So there are differences there. So it's a matter of if you're going to have somebody in charge, does that country allow individuals to be individuals? And that gets back to, it's less about the religion, it's less about the nationalism of the country, more about how the country treats people. Isolation is important too. If you think about it, the time the U.S. really just was about 1870 to 1910. We exploded, and we were highly isolationist. In fact, we got drug kicking, screaming into World War II. And that was only after Woodrow Wilson had already been elected and started getting us off, created the Fed, did the income tax, all that kind of stuff. We went very isolationist. We went highly, highly active after World War II, and we built a lot of great nations. It was a great time for the U.S. too. We went, again, isolationist in the early 70s, and we exploded then again. And, Carter came in and he kind of screwed up a lot of the economy, but the technology was already set and going. So isolationism by itself is not usually a bad thing. What it means is I'm focusing on myself more than I'm worrying about everybody else around me. But it's got to be accommodated, like what Teddy Roosevelt says, speak softly and carry a big stick. You have to let people around you know, it's like, just because I'm not interfering with you daily or interacting with you daily doesn't give you right to push me around. You push me around, I'm going to come and curb stomp you. You're toast. Don't mess with me.
We're coming to the point, or possibly already there, where you just know this big bad United States of America, even if they're isolationists and haven't messed with anyone in 10 years, you know what they're capable of. And also, they're probably more capable than ever because they've been doing nothing but bench press and steroids for the past 10 years and become the biggest, baddest version they've ever been. So, what else? What is the other deterrent from isolationism? Because it seems like it's all good
Yeah.
on the surface.
Isolationism, if it becomes too isolationist, you end up stagnating your society because you're not bringing in new ideas, you're not learning how other people do, you're not taking advantage of what you do. I mean, the American experiment works so well because it is such a melting pot that it should be, right? Now it's becoming much more like a chunky beef stew, which is bad. But it's because you can see what others are doing and improve upon it. That was the whole concept of all the states. Hey, every state, you got some general rules that you have to behave about how you treat individuals, but how you actually want to run yourself, we don't give a crap. You each set yourself up independently. You do have to have a body that's elected by the local people. Other than that, we don't care. And that created competition, and competition breeds success. Like when what's the big thing you do in physical therapy? It's like, when I was going through it, I pushed myself a lot harder than originally I thought I would. But 2 weeks in after my fourth visit, they're like, we're going to push this guy really hard. It's a competition of like, well, sometimes the physical therapist up there, he's taking like the strong, like a 30-pound, a kettlebell and says, see what I can do. Can you do that? I'm like, I'm struggling with a 15. He goes, oh, you're not quite where I am. And he go to a 20. See, I can do 20. And I'm like, okay, I'm grabbing 20. See, I got a 22. With like a really shattered wrist.
Mm-hmm.
It's that competition breeds people to want to succeed. We have an innate, humans, especially men, have this innate desire to dominate. And if it's unchecked, it becomes actual physical domination of slavery, which still exists in Africa, strongman, things like that. But it becomes much more of a soft way of doing things. So I think we look at that, we use competition, we have to be aware of it. If you become too isolationist, you cut yourself off and you lose a lot of that. Isolationism to me is, you know what, we're going to stay involved in the world economically and to a large extent culturally. We're not going to get involved militarily unless we absolutely have to, and we're really not going to interfere in how countries want to govern themselves. If you, Mr. Country, want to be a bunch of assholes and you want to dominate your people, that's up to you. We're not going to mess with that. We're not going to go build your country for you. You touch one hair on the head of any American anywhere in the world, and we will literally glass your entire capital, and we don't give a shit. And then we're going to walk away. We're not even going to rebuild your nation. We're just going to destroy you. When you do that, everybody's like, oh, don't mess with them, but they're free to interact with you everywhere else. And that keeps you as best a breed, and it keeps you also focused on growing my own people and making sure that we pass it on. And ultimately, other countries will start to mimic us more. Because they say, well, they're succeeding. Maybe we need to give it a try. Let's first get rid of this strongman and try it over.
So just to that can be, speaking of dirty underhand tactics, rakish behavior. What if we were like that? We were steadfastly isolationists. We only interfered if we were attacked, right? Retaliatory.
Yeah.
I mean, this happens all the time. New York gets bombed, and there's a playing card on the corpses, and it's like, hi, I'm from Iran, and we hate you, and it was someone else. So now we're attacking Iran. Yeah. You stop that.
Well, I mean, and that's where, at this point, we have the ability to know who it was or not. I mean, we're very good at intelligence and knowing where things came from and what it was and where places were bet. People forget the U.S. military is essentially unbeaten. We won World War I, we won World War II, we won the Korean War, we won Vietnam, The reason we've failed is because we went into a nation building state or because our politicians wanted us to fail. U.S. military is unmatched. I was working at a defense contractor when the Gulf War I happened. I was working a military defense contractor, and one of the things that this defense contractor built was the Patriot missile systems. And so we had a lot of insight and things watching. It was like amazing. Dom was the third largest military in the world. It was the U.S., Russia, and just behind Russia was Iraq. USSR wasn't too far, but Russia wasn't too far behind America at that point. It's like, you guys are like spitting distance. It's really close. And in 3 days, we completely dominated the entire country and destroyed 95% of their military. Not just their equipment, but their soldiers. And they had 10 times the number of soldiers we did on the ground. That alone, I think, shook the pillars of the Middle East of like, don't screw with these guys. Afghanistan, we completely took over that entire country in 6 weeks. It was done the second time. The problem is we went into, let's be nice and let's rebuild them and let's try to make them believe our culture and things like that. You're not going to change a person's culture. What you do is you go on and you break everything there. You destroy the existing political leader and say, okay, we're gone. Well, what are you going to do to us? Yeah. I don't know, but don't fuck around with us next time.
Right.
That's it. I don't care what you do. Just don't bother me. That's all it takes.
And of
And if
course,
you had that out, that's isolationism to me, and that's what Teddy Roosevelt wanted for isolationism.
yeah, that seems very reasonable. What you run into, yeah, because you say, "Oh, we can find out who did what," but they can't even find out for sure who killed Charlie Kirk. Like, I think the main problem is that our government are chronic liars who think we can't handle truths, or if they did tell us the truth, like if they like we don't know who killed Charlie Kirk, but if it was, let's just say Netanyahu did it. Um, Like, I mean, if we let them know Netanyahu did it, the people will be steadfastly against Israel, and then all of our plans for using Israel to hold back the tide of Islam or whatever reasoning we have is screwed up. We can't let the truth screw up the plan that we know is best. So it seems like the biggest issue is just the fact that we can't trust our government.
Well, it comes down to people wanting to build fiefdoms and protect themselves. And ultimately, the thing is, if we had that Teddy Rooseveltian approach to isolationism, we don't care. We're not using Israel to hold back Islam. We're helping Israel because they like to trade with us. We get benefits from having them around there, and we don't like people to die. But at the end of the day, Islam needs to be afraid of America. If we screw it, remember what happened to Iraq. Remember what happened to Afghanistan. Remember what happened to Iraq the second time. We need to understand that's what happens when you do something. Libya, we'll just go and completely level your country. We don't give a shit. But make it so that, and when we're done, we pull out. You get zero benefits. So if you survive our initial attack, you're left with nothing. You start from scratch. That alone will change the way people deal with us. But people in government don't want that. They want to be able to play power brokers. They want to be able to enrich themselves. They want to be able to do power plays like we're going to set up Ukraine and we're going to have an overthrow because we don't like this government. We're going to bring a new one. And then Russia's going to invade, but we don't care because we're selling weapons. And people are using government to enrich themselves. When government is powerful enough to control its own destiny, that's when countries fall. Government
Yeah.
powerful enough to control its own destiny is when countries fall, nations fall, empires fall. Government must be kept weak, and that means the people inside of it must have extremely limited power. The era of basically if it was me, hey, once you get above a GS11, which is kind of a mid-level bureaucrat, you get 8 years and then you're out. You can't stay as above a GS11. I mean, we're going to lose institutional history and memory. Good, we shouldn't have it. We shouldn't have it.
What do you mean institutional
Oh,
memory?
well, we know, you got to keep this guy, like Brennan. Oh, we have to keep him around because he's been in the CIA and FBI for 40 years. That's why he has to be in those positions, because he knows all the secrets and things like that. If he had barely put in 8 years, he wouldn't know the secrets. He wouldn't be able to hold it over people. He wouldn't be able to build his own little fiefdom and his own little group of people who follow him and his own little acolytes that he's put into various places.
Shadow
And
government.
people he's helped get position, and you gotta raise over things like that. You eliminate it all. What does it matter if somebody knows what happened in 1963 or 1984 in some foreign country? It doesn't matter because that's done. Go in with a clean sheet and basically force your nation to be the big bad bully who comes in, kicks ass to protect themselves, and then washes the slate clean. We forget. We forgive and forget. We go forward. Oh, you do it to me again? I have no problem just leveling you again. That's fine. If you want to get leveled every 4 years, go for it. No problem. I don't care.
Yeah.
But after that, after doing 2 or 3, nobody can do it. Nobody will be able to do it a fourth time, and everybody else will be afraid of it. So enforce your own right to life, liberty by dominating the other countries, and then forgive and forget. Literally forget by taking the career people out and saying, go away, you're no longer part of government.
Yeah.
That breaks it.
And I mean, you could say this is as idealistic as the communist utopia, but imagine, I'll just go ahead and use Charlie Kirk. I think he was it's why it's so tragic to me from American perspective. I think that we were sent from God, the prototype in a fallen America that's nothing like it was supposed to be, a guy that shows you a constitutionalist Christian, the perfect shining example of that, extremely intelligent, well-spoken, literate and kind. I don't know how many of his videos you've watched. I've watched, like most people, dozens and dozens of hours of them. I mean, he was really good at that. What if our whole government was made up of Charlie Kirks? And then they would address these other countries like a true American Protestant Christian would. They wouldn't you wouldn't have to worry about the greed element, like, oh, now that we've blown everything up in retaliatory fashion, let's get my cousin's company to rebuild it. And that'll be a great thing to do. And then your cousin and you make a, $50 billion on the rebuild.
Exactly.
But I think that is idealistic because I don't just due to human nature, right? Like you have to even in the Christian context, you must understand that many people who are trying to be Christian are constantly being pulled in by sin. So I think that's just as idealistic. But I do think it's a worthy endeavor to try to return it to its in America to its original principles of Protestant Christian adhering to the Constitution.
Yeah.
That gives us a ground to build a house on. We don't built an incredible house on a foundation, and over time we've removed the foundation, and now we have a crumbling house on top of it. And you got all these people not wanting to rebuild the foundation.
Yeah. It's the difference is America was founded on the ability of letting the individual succeed, right? And that also means letting the individual choose who they want to associate with. I'm not going to force you to be friends with somebody else if you don't want to be. I don't have to do that. That was the founding of America. You succeed how you want to, you succeed with who you want to. And if you want to succeed collectively, you guys create collectives and do it. That's no problem. That's the point of America. And when you start to break that down and you limit how a person can succeed or how much they can succeed or who they have to associate with, you're now going against a person's innate beliefs. And it's not about, well, they won't cross races or anything like that. My wife's Chinese. And we met in China. 我是中国人, as I tell people. I'm Chinese. It freaks them out when I say that. Because they're like, you're not Chinese. But people will group with who they want to group with, right? Who they have familial and intellectual connections with. So by forcing certain groupings or by forcing people to only do what you want them to do, you break down the natural tendency of a person to want to aspire to the best. And they do one of two things. They either rebel or they just give up and become a serf. And 95% of the people will take the easy one, which is give up and become a serf. And that's ultimately what communism and socialism relies upon, is people just giving up. It's like the old Alexander Solzhenitsyn thing of, and how we burned in the cells, knowing that at night, if just one of us stood up when the Secret Service came around, the secret police came around in the USSR, and one of us shot him, they would never have come out again. It's because there were tens of thousands of secret policemen, but there were tens of millions of Russians. And if just 20 of them got killed in a month, they wouldn't have done it anymore. But because people were just like, well, I'll just give up and be a serf, I'll just do whatever's needed, it's easier. The long-term damage was irreparable. So
Yeah.
we need to fight against that. And ultimately, leftism plays on a person's desire to be lazy, to have everything handed to them, and the belief that, well, if I can make somebody else better in their own position, then I'm a morally better person. And really, you're not. You're a morally better person if you improve them with your own resources. If you take resources from somebody else to improve them, you're not. Literally, you're just a robber baron. And that's what it comes down to.
Absolutely. All right, Dan, we're going to call it because we're at a little over an hour. We need to do this exact same thing again in a week or two, because I'm telling you, I'm obsessed with these broad concepts, because I think that most Americans, I don't think we weren't taught these things. We were taught, I always say we're in a communist matrix. We're denied true history. We're denied the concepts that make you, critical thinking skills, deductive reasoning, the scientific method. Like, they don't teach this stuff because they want us to be dumb, but we'll approach that subject next time. But yeah, Dan, I'll get this uploaded over the weekend. I'll start clipping it. You'll start seeing your beautiful face on the internet a couple of times. But all right, Dan, I appreciate you, man. I'll
Anytime, man.
you soon.
See ya.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, bye.